Welcome to another discussion of Annex Cloud Market Movers. We bring in industry luminaries and experts to help us through the current times, as well as give us a vision for the future. Today, I'm very, very excited to welcome Maria Prados. Maria is the VP of Global Retail and B2B at Worldpay. Maria, welcome to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much. I am really, really excited to be here today and start discussing a little bit about these shopping habits and the craziness that is happening all around us.
Well, great. Well, before we get started, Maria, maybe you can give our audience a little bit of an introduction about your role at Worldpay and how you help customers there.
Yes, before that, a little bit about Worldpay, in case someone doesn't know, but Worldpay is the #1 global acquirer, and we process over 31 million transactions across all of the channels on any given day, right? So this gives us a very, very broad view and in depth of how and where these consumers around the world are paying for goods and what are the changes that are happening. So in my role, I joined Worldpay around 7 years ago. And as you said, I run the global retail and the B2B vertical, basically looking at the strategy, partnerships, and marketing. So it is very, very exciting that today we're going to be sharing some of these insights and some of the thought leadership that we have been doing.
Wonderful. You know, let's start from a few months ago. We've gone, obviously, we've talked about this a lot. We talk about it every day. We've gone through a sea of change from a personal perspective, but also from a business perspective. That's resulted in a massive growth in e-commerce over the last sort of 8 to 9 months. But it's also resulted in some challenging environments within stores in some verticals. While some verticals have grown in store as well, example grocery, but in some verticals there's been challenges as well. And you know, consumers are adopting new habits, in adopting new sort of digital channels in which they can sort of potentially buy. I mean, could you give us a little bit of an idea on what you're seeing from a payments perspective across all these different channels, and what have you seen happen in terms of consumer habits over the last several months?
Yes, for sure. And we at Worldpay also wanted to quantify this change, right? And we know it has been happening, but what we did was we went out to the market and researched around 1,200 shoppers around the world. And I wanted to share some of the things that we found because I find them extremely exciting. So first of all, 90% of them said that they have changed their purchasing behavior. Obviously, I would say that not by choice, but actually rather the lack of choice in this case. But it's still like pretty much the whole population. And even when asking them even deeper, already over 10% said that they thought these changes were going to be for good. So they were not going to go back into their old habits. And I personally also believe that the more this kind of pandemic continues and the longer it gets, the stickier the new habits are going to get. So basically, there were 3 very key important findings that I wanted to share with you today. And the first one is that omnichannel is now a must to survive. Right, like you were saying before, a little bit about different channels, where actually we found that over 70% of shoppers use more than one channel during their shopping journey. So we also found that websites right now are their preferred channel, but as you say, physical stores are having a very, very large influence, especially at some specific points like purchasing or when they're looking after customer care. But we're also seeing that there are very important new channels that are picking up, like you said. And probably the most important one right now is social commerce. And I don't know if you've seen, but Facebook reported an increase of over 70% of Facebook Messenger users in areas where there was a lockdown, which is tremendous, right? But also when you ask, okay, this is definitely a marketing channel where people are interacting, but is this really a sales channel? We also find that half, so around 50% of the shoppers globally are already saying that they are likely to use social media to buy a product. So this is the interesting piece, especially for me, right, of payments, is actually you need to enable that frictionless payment within the whole platform without very clunky redirects or asks to enter this like very long card details pages that you have to do, which is for mobile are not 100% optimized. So it's very, very exciting. And then probably the last one is around digital payment methods, right? We had seen before COVID massive growth in those, but now COVID and all of these new channels and the growth of e-commerce is pushing them even to the next level. And for us, we have two key winners, right? So digital wallets, and they already represent around 50% of retail e-commerce payments. But we think that they are going to be 60% by 2023. And this is a very easy way for shoppers to shop and to pay across any channel, to be honest, and no longer only digital, because as you know, now with contactless, you can pay in the store as well using these digital wallets. So they're pretty much taken over. But then we have another one, which is what we call the buy now, pay later. And these basically are payment methods that allow you to do a couple of things. So the first one would be if you're buying something online, then you don't have to actually pay for it until you've received it and you're happy with it, which is pretty good for the shopper experience. But also it works really well in kind of like a pandemic that is having some impact on the economy, because it also allows to split your payment in like equal payments across every month. So we are seeing now that this is the fastest growing payment method actually over anything else. And we expect that it's just going to continue.
That's interesting. So I mean, there's quite a few points you brought up, and that represents a pretty massive shift in the payments world over the last sort of year, much more than probably I think both of us have seen in a few years before that, driven by consumer habits change. Whether you talk about shifting of new channels, whether it's social commerce, contactless payments, buy online, shifting towards sort of that digital sort of purchasing. One of the things that I want to sort of, get your thoughts on more is what impact this would have on the holidays. Just to give you some pretext for that question, we've been chatting with several of our commerce platform partners, and the growth of commerce over the sort of last decade has been from, let's say, approximately 5% to 15% of sales. And many of the commerce platform partners are projecting their customers to go from 25 to 30% of a retailer's sales happening through commerce, maybe more in some situations for some of the retailers in this upcoming holiday. Not only that, a lot of brands that were not direct to consumer are now starting to adopt direct to consumer, which means that they will have a form of online commerce payments as well. So clearly there is a big shift towards e-commerce. I think we all understand that. But, and you mentioned these are, as the longer this stays, it will be, it will ingrain that behavior into the consumer's sort of mindset, and it'll continue. But what is your forecast for the short term for the holidays? I mean, how would you ask for people to plan for the holidays, given the lockdowns and the shift in consumer behavior?
Yeah, I mean, very good question, right? And that's pretty much what everyone is pretty concerned about, because the holidays are already here. I think one of the pieces that we're starting to see is that the kind of holiday period has kind of been made longer, right? So before it started in Black Friday, right? Like right after Thanksgiving, and that's when the holiday season began and all of the deals happened. But we've seen Amazon once again kind of disrupting the industry and moving Amazon Prime Day to mid-October. And that's when all of the big brands went right next to them to start putting their deals up. So we think that, and we're seeing actually in the data as well, that the holidays now has been extended. And this links very nicely with what you were saying about everything going more towards e-commerce, right? Before, we could remember like all of those crazy lines for Black Friday of people waiting outside the store to open the doors and just go in there and like buy whatever you can or you can find. But actually, it doesn't feel that that's going to happen this year, or at least not at that scale, due to all of the health and security issues. But then people are like planning and thinking earlier because they know that delivery takes some time and they want to make sure that they get it right. So there's this like extended period that for sure. Then the next thing, as you said, is like e-commerce is king, right? And this is the time to pretty much go back to basics. And I always say this, if you reduce retail to almost nothing, you end up with three things. One is you need to source or manufacture the product. The other one is you need to deliver it. And then the other one is you need to take the payment. If one of those three actually don't work, then retail doesn't work. So I think those three things are the pieces that before they were kind of taken for granted because they just happened in like our operational or BAU projects, but actually now maybe not. So those are the things where I would suggest that everyone is going to have to prioritize and go back to those basics and make sure that everything's automated and everything's digital, right? Like we were saying, there are new channels, there's new ways that people are going to interact with you, there's newer generations that are pushing even harder. And the pandemic has pretty much pushed the whole industry 5 years ahead in a couple of months.
Makes sense. And you know, I'll add a number 4 that is a little bit near and dear to heart, just to get your thoughts, right? And so in addition to payments, you need someone to buy it, and you want those people to keep buying it. So that brings me to the topic of loyalty and retention, which is near and dear to our hearts, and something that I know Annex Cloud and Worldpay are working really close in together for. You know, what are your thoughts as a result of this environment as it comes to retention? What we've seen, and just to give you some numbers on what we did research on back in 2008 when we saw the last sort of global recession, loyalty had a major resurgence. In fact, brands that focused on loyalty came out faster out of recession. They were growing 20% better. The consumers, however, during that time had a major shift in their loyalty. We saw a study that was done for 685 major brands across 30 million consumers in 2008, and the study was released in 2009, where they showcased and said about 52% of a brand's loyal customers defected. About half of them defected because they just got a cheaper option. Half of them defected because they just didn't want the product or didn't need the product at that time in sense, but they defected nonetheless. So, you know, we haven't done the study for 2020 yet, but I'm sure something will come, and we're starting to see some of that already. That's one. The second part is there is new brands that are getting exposure now because of distribution issues that weren't getting that before. And those brands will need to retain their customers. Even if it's e-commerce, you know, you'll have to keep your customers because you don't want it to drop after this is all done. So what's your take on retention overall over the next few months and years to come?
Yeah, and I think you're completely right. And this is also an opportunity and a challenge that comes with e-commerce as well, because the more everything moves to e-commerce, the bigger and the tougher the competition gets, right? Because once again, you're now like one click away from your competitor or from the product from another competitor. So it is super, super important to make sure that that communication and that understanding of the shopper is there, and that you build that loyalty around what is going to add value to your shopper. That is for sure. And actually, not only that, it's always cheaper to get a repeat purchase from an existing customer than to try and acquire a new one, right? So definitely, even for the economics and the bottom line, it's going to pay off. And when I was reading a little bit more about loyalty, actually a couple of months ago, for another panel that we were talking about this as well, we were saying that even the new generations are still very interested in some kind of loyalty. It might not be the traditional loyalty that they were used to, and maybe just a reward or a point for every purchase or every pound that you spend. But it is just kind of like a new transformation, and especially like Generation Z and even younger than millennials, they still want to be part of those loyalty programs, but it just has to look slightly different, right? And loyal customers are always like 5 times more likely to purchase probably, which is kind of like what we see at Worldpay as well. So I think for me, as everything moves and with all of this like digital disruption, there's a couple of things to consider. The first one is like, how do you actually identify your loyal shopper, right? And this is kind of like links really nicely with payments and a loyalty company. But it used to be like quite of a struggle. You need to give your shopper this like card, so an extra card that they need to identify themselves with, and then they need to make sure that they scan it before they pay it, or that they have the number online and enter it again. So it's quite clunky, and especially the younger generations are just not going to be happy with that. And it's not seamless. It's not one click. They're building the experience. They're interacting with your brand. They don't want to get like, I don't know, let's stop the focus and the attention to have to look for their card or the loyalty card to kind of add it. So new things coming up into tokenizing cards that would identify a shopper, as you very well know. Then that way, just by using your card or even in a digital wallet, then you would already enter into that loyalty program, right? So that's really what we call it more in the payment world it would be like an invisible or a frictionless payment. So this would be like the invisible or frictionless loyalty side of it, right? Which, as we said, is as important. So that's probably kind of the first thing. And then the second one, probably more around how do you get more shoppers, as you said, to really interact and to become loyal. And this touches a little bit into the new way of doing loyalty. And I think for me, it is all around data and how do you actually use the data to add value to the shopper. And now they are not okay with just having like one size fit all loyalty program where everyone just gets the same, because they are now used to this like mass personalization that happens. So the more you can actually know your individual shoppers, even at that level, and the more you can actually understand what is going to be adding value to them, probably the better, right? And I think this kind of links nicely with things that we were talking about, like single customer view, and how do you actually understand that your shopper so that he is happy to give you their information because they think that you as a brand or as a retailer are actually going to add value back at them. And I was reading, and there's a report from KPMG that said that almost 80% of the millennials will switch to a different company that offered a better loyalty program, right? So this is massive. So loyalty is still there. It's just like a different view to see loyalty.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things we talk about is that the change in loyalty from transactional loyalty to experiential loyalty. And that's the generational shift you're talking about, where, you know, original programs were focused on buying and getting points. Now it's about the customer experience, the customer journey, to create an emotional bond with that end customer so that now they stick with you from time to come. And I'm going to bring a few of your ideas together because you've got so many things you mentioned that all comes together with that experience and loyalty. One is that change in channels, right? The identification of the customer when they buy on social, when they buy on digital, when they buy in store, when they buy in all these different places, in one single customer view, as you talked about, thereby identifying them as one customer, and then tying that into the payments creates a single view of that customer that you mentioned, but at the same time allows for the entire customer journey to be part of the loyalty experience, not just the transactional. And that creates that emotional bond that keeps that customer around, and allows sort of that extension within sort of their lifetime value, so to speak, for that customer. So I think, you know, all of these are great points, and it all comes together with multiple channels, with the change into digital, with the ability of the consumers to essentially interact with your brand wherever you want. and not just the transaction anymore, right? So that's wonderful that you brought it up. And that single view of the customer that you talked about is extremely important to then identify that customer, but also understand their journey and improve and influence their journey along the way. So that's great. And I think, lastly, sort of changing a little bit towards out of the general world we've talked about. I mean, what are innovations that you see that may come in 2021 and beyond? I mean, you talked a little bit about what's happening now with the advent of buy online pay and or buy online or buy online pay in store, if I'm saying it correctly, or other sort of ways of paying through social, if you will. Mm-hmm. But what are innovations you think will come in 2021 and beyond in the world of payments?
Yes, so we're already seeing a lot of the changes happening, right? Like as we were saying before, it just feels like the industry has moved 5 years ahead just because they had no chance to survive otherwise. So I think probably apart from what you're saying, like new channels that are interacting and everything more digital, I think one of the biggest changes is the thinking around the physical store. Right, which like we've discussed before, is still extremely important, and it is still needed. And you can see all of the marketplaces and pure players thinking about like some kind of face-to-face interaction. So the physical store is not going to die, but it just has to change, because that's probably the piece where retail, or the side where retail has taken the longest to really put the investment. And of course, there's a lot of reasons behind that, starting with like horrendous legacy systems, right, that have been there for ages. And when I used to work at retail, that was my biggest nightmare. And like trying to get things quick to market and making quick patches with new technologies and new channels so that they could talk, but actually it was not fit for purpose. But now that there's like actually no other chance than to rethink what you're doing, then all of the retailers are now starting to have those discussions into, okay, so how do I transform the stores that I have, and what are the different pieces that I need to put together? And payments has like a very important role in those and things that we're seeing. So for example, all the some of the biggest examples are more going to be about making sure that they're allowed to be opened again, right? So you need to reduce the interaction. So then how do you reduce that interaction in a physical store? So there's a few ways you can do. You can go all the way into some kind of like scan and go. So kind of like the Amazon Go, which we are doing with some of our customers right now, where you would just allow your shopper to have an app. And when they go in, they pick their product and they'll just pay in there with the app. Right? That is somehow a card not present, like a digital payment, but in the face-to-face environment, no interaction, pretty quick in and out. But of course, we all know that stores, one of the biggest benefits is to have that maybe like salesperson giving you like what is the right thing and giving you advice into what you need to buy or not buy. So sometimes that model doesn't work for all of the products and all of the subverticals within the retail industry. So then we have different variations into that. And one of them would be something like pay by link. So right now in the physical store, as painful as it is to me to say and to admit, payment is probably one of the biggest friction points. Once you have your product and you have to go in there and in a queue and wait forever until you go into the till and then you go through the payment, right? Like it's horrendous. So the other new technology now is enabling us to do different things. So we could start sending what we call pay by link, so a URL to your personal smartphone where you can actually make that payment. And many times it's just a one-click payment if you're using some kind of like digital wallet like Apple Pay or Google Pay. Right, so pretty easy. You don't even have to wait. You'll just like leave the store right there and with the salesperson that you were talking to at the beginning. So really, really slick. Or you can get a QR code, very similar thing, right? This in Asia, by the way, has been the standard way for ages. And it's only now starting to come more to the Western world. So that is, that's really, really interesting. And probably The last thing that I would raise is what we call endless aisle. And like we said before, like stores at the very beginning were pretty much a warehouse, right? And many stores are still like that. You have to have all of the product out, all of the sizes, all of the colors, all of the different models, because they have this mentality of if the shopper sees it, then they'll buy it. But actually, maybe not, right? Now it's everything. You were talking about more experiential experiences. So this is exactly what it is. The store has to be way more, way more fun, way more engaging for people to interact. And that means that you cannot have everything out there. And but then how do you deal with the stock and the product? So another thing is like making sure that all of your inventory is open and visible for anyone, no matter where. So actually, you know what, I don't have this size, but I have it in stock. So why don't, instead of telling you go home and buy it from our website, which no one's going to do, I'll take the payment right now here, and then I'll make sure that it gets delivered to your house, and in the next 2 days you will have it. Right. So those are probably the top 3 things that we're discussing most right now around the in-store experience.
Wonderful. Maria, we got so many insights that I think I could write a whole sort of essay on many changes that are happening. Clearly, we have some interesting times we've gone through, but very interesting times to come. We can continue talking, but this has been a fabulous introduction to our customers and our partners around the world of payments and the changes that have happened around that and the impact of loyalty potentially to come within that. So thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And for everyone else, if you want to go check out some more such videos, go to annexcloud.com/marketmovers, where you will find amazing such videos, and keep joining us. Thank you so much.